As soon as Tom saw me, he pleaded. "Please, take care of me." Huh? Why should I? I blurted out reflexively. Who's got the nerve to say that, I wonder? Who was it that said no way? Ask someone else, when I was hospitalized with a broken bone? You got what you deserved. Be thankful you even survived. I'm not gonna extend a helping hand to Tom anymore. I'm Susan Clearwater, 32 years old. 5 years ago, I married my husband Tom, and we have a son named Asher, and a Shiba Inu named Champ. We're a family of 3, plus 1 pet. Tom works at a major IT firm and is super busy all the time. He leaves for work early in the morning, and it's not uncommon for him to get home past midnight. He often works on weekends, and once a month, he's out of town on business trips. Thanks to this, Tom barely has any time to spend with the family, and he hardly ever plays with Asher. Tom's career has been on the up and up, and he made it into a managerial position in his 30s. The dream of mine to build a house within the loop of the subway came true because Tom worked his fingers to the bone. My childhood home was in the countryside where my family were full-time farmers. That's why I've always had this strong desire for a suburban house with a yard in the city. I'm grateful to Tom because Asher and I can live comfortably. I've come to terms with the fact that family time is scarce. To outsiders, we might seem like a blessed family. However, with Tom being away so often, I'm left to shoulder the childcare and housework alone. It's what you call solo parenting. I wanted to put Asher in daycare and go back to work, but Tom insisted on a kindergarten that also teaches, so Asher goes to preschool. As a result, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have a dear friend who's a real pillar of strength to me. She's Mitzi, a childhood friend of mine. She's the same age as me, and we're from the same rural area. By coincidence, our kids go to same preschool. Mitzi got divorced last year, and now she's a single mom. Having tea at my place after Asher goes to preschool has become my only breather. We talk about the frustrations with Tom and the challenges of parenting. It was during these chats with Mitzi that I realized it. I seem to have developed some resentment towards Tom without knowing it. People often told me that harboring complaints would bring bad luck, and I believed that too. Maybe I was just telling myself that I shouldn't feel discontented. One day, while walking Champ, he suddenly took off running. I chased after him frantically. There was a car stopped ahead, and while Champ managed to avoid it, I couldn't and ended up hitting the parked car. It was totally my fault. Champ looked on from the sidewalk, worried. It was good that Champ was unharmed, but I couldn't get up. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance and ended up being admitted with a bruised shoulder and a fractured ankle. It looks like I'll be hospitalized for about 3 months. Now that I'm hospitalized, I'm wondering who will take care of Asher. And there's the house to think about. Once I start worrying, there seems to be no end. I called Tom's cell phone. I thought he would cooperate at a time like this, but he didn't answer, just kept going to voicemail. While I was fretting, Mitzi called. It was to discuss costumes for the preschool play, but I cut the conversation short to ask her to look after Asher. Mitzi was initially surprised and concerned for me, but she agreed to take care of Asher after hearing that my voice was stronger than she expected. I was so grateful I almost cried. Next, I called my mother. I told her about the accident and that I'd be in the hospital for a few weeks. My mother said she would come up to the city and would come to the house after she sorted out her affairs. Until my mother can come, Mitzi will have to do. After I hung up with my mother, Tom finally called back. He said he was sorry for being busy and not able to answer the phone. I told him about the accident and asked him to bring some clothes and other things I needed. But his response was unbelievable. No way. Why do I have to do that? I have an early day tomorrow, ask someone else. I had thought that Tom would be worried about me. But the surprise was on me. It wasn't the refusal to bring my things that shocked me, it was the lack of concern. I had wanted Tom to care more about me and our family. Perhaps I was naive to expect any tender words from him. The next day, Mitzi came to visit me in the hospital. She brought me a change of clothes and other necessities from my house. Mitzi has a spare key to my house. I have a spare key to Mitzi's house as well. We've always agreed to help each other out in times of need. I brought plenty of towels. Let me know if you need anything else, she said. I couldn't help but feel grateful for Mitzi's thoughtfulness. Her kindness was a stark contrast to Tom's attitude the day before. I was so touched that I almost burst into tears. Mitzi said, "You're overreacting," as she laughed and handed me a handkerchief. Mitzi is the complete opposite of me in personality, calm and adept at reading the room, always empathizing with others. I've never seen Mitzi get into a fight with anyone. She's planning to get a qualification and work outside the home, unlike me. She's nothing like me. How's your injury? You should take better care of yourself. I found comfort in Mitzi's ever-gentle tone. Don't worry about Asher. He stayed over at my place last night and slept with my kids. Without me having to say anything, Mitzi understood what I was going through. I wonder why Tom is so indifferent to us. He's busy, I get that, but he hasn't even come to visit you or seen Asher, right? I vented my frustrations about Tom to Mitzi as I visited with her. Mitzi smiled kindly at me as I sighed and lamented. Men have their way, don't they? He's probably dealing with stress at work that we can't understand. That might be true, but not showing up, not worrying, that seems a bit too much. But he's working late, not out playing, right? That's true. We have a comfortable life and our own home because of Tom. He provides more than enough financially. Somehow, Mitzi's words made me feel better. Let me know if there's anything I can do. I can make time, so I'll come to visit whenever you need. Venting to Mitzi gave me a bit of relief. I'll plan to have a serious talk with Tom after I'm discharged. More than anything, I wanted to see Asher. My mom came all the way from the countryside to help, and somehow I got through the 3 weeks of hospitalization and returned home. Mom had to head back to the countryside right after dropping me off due to farm work. My home, which I hadn't seen for weeks, felt incredibly nostalgic. The one who greeted me was Champ. Maybe Champ thinks the crutches are an enemy because he keeps barking at them. Sitting on the sofa, I looked around the living room. Nothing had changed. Indeed, there's no place like home. Even though I settled down on the sofa, Champ wouldn't stop barking at me. Come on, I can't use the crutches anymore. What's up? Champ stuck his head into my bag and pulled out a handkerchief. It was the one I had intended to return to Mitzi. I had put it in my bag to wash it back at home. Champ started tugging at the hem of my pants. It seemed like he was trying to lead me somewhere. I struggled to my feet and followed Champ, crutches in hand. He marched excitedly ahead. Champ stopped in front of our bedroom and scratched at the door to open it. Why the bedroom, Champ? What's in there? Without hesitation, Champ stuck his head under the bed and pulled something out in his mouth. It looked like a piece of fabric with a pretty pattern. Champ dropped it in front of me. It looked familiar. When I spread it out, it turned out to be a scarf. I felt like I had seen it a few weeks ago. Yes, Mitzi was wearing it. I saw it when she visited me in the hospital. But why would that scarf be here? A disturbing thought crossed my mind. No, that couldn't be it. After all, Mitzi is my childhood friend, my best friend, she's kind. I shook my head vigorously to dispel the terrible thought. Then Champ climbed onto the bed and started pulling at the sheets. I felt the blood drain from my body. If what Champ was indicating was true, then it meant that Mitzi had been sleeping in our bed. Mitzi's friendly face flashed across my mind. It had to be an overreaction. I told Champ that it couldn't be possible that Mitzi was sleeping here. Mitzi wouldn't be sleeping here, right? Champ responded by gently licking my face. In the afternoon, Asher returned home. When he saw me, he hugged me tight. Asher truly is my sunshine. I felt my spirits lift and warmth flood my heart. Hugging Asher back, I tentatively asked him, "Where did you sleep while Mommy was in the hospital?" "In my own room." Mitzi and her kids slept over too. It was fun. What did that mean? I thought Asher had stayed over at Mitzi's place. Didn't Mitzi say that? My doubts only grew. Then where had Mitzi slept? I boldly asked Asher where Mitzi had been sleeping. I don't know. But she and Daddy talked in the living room late into the night. They probably drank some wine too. I left Asher and went back to the bedroom alone. And stood there in silence. It couldn't be that Tom and Mitzi had spent time together in this bed. That my husband, who is indifferent to me and our family, could have slept here with Mitzi. I just couldn't believe that. Or maybe it's more accurate to say I didn't want to believe it. The bed was neatly made, no sign of disarray in the sheets or comforter. But maybe some scents just can't be completely removed. And there was a forgotten item. That champ would notice it of all things. Since this suspicion arose, I can't bring myself to sleep in that bed anymore. I've started sleeping with Asher instead. Asher seems happy about it and doesn't find it strange. Tom has become a repulsive presence to me. Various thoughts keep crossing my mind, leading to many sleepless nights. Where did we go wrong as a couple? When the cast came off my foot, Tom left the house unusually cheerful. I had a bad feeling about it. While waiting for the preschool pickup bus, Mitzi showed up. You're all dressed up today. Your makeup is a bit more extravagant than usual, isn't it? Good morning. You're looking fancy today. Got a date? I asked casually, trying not to let on. Mitzi smiled unabashedly and told me, I've met someone special. There's no clear evidence, but it seems Mitzi is doing something despicable. Mitzi is in love with the very person she shouldn't be. I struggled to hide my trembling, furious hands. After parting ways with a beaming Mitzi, I walked home in a daze. I can't just let Tom and Mitzi carry on like this. I'm going to put an end to it. Once I can move around freely, I've decided to take action against them both. That night, I told Tom that Asher and I would be going back to my parents' house next week and invited him to come along. I'm not going. I've got work, you two go ahead, he said. I had already figured that Tom wouldn't go. But what irked me was his smile. He asked me when we were leaving and when we'd be back. Despite his lack of interest, he seemed to care about knowing exactly when the house would be empty. I told him we'd leave on Wednesday and return Sunday night. Okay, so you'll be back Sunday night, he confirmed. Tom took out his phone and started putting it in his schedule. It was clear to me why Tom was so keen on confirming our return. I didn't miss the smirk on his face as he fiddled with his smartphone. The 5 days back home were wonderful. Asher was fascinated with the farming, spending every day in the fields with my dad, enjoying playing in the dirt. On the way home, Asher repeatedly said, I had fun. I want to come back again. The thought of the confrontation that awaited us at home weighed on me. After we got back from my parents, Tom suddenly announced he'd be going on a week-long business trip. He'd been on trips before, but they were at most 2 nights. A whole week seemed suspicious. When I looked puzzled, Tom started talking about work more than he usually would, saying, I'll be visiting a lot of clients. Might even land a big contract. Perhaps he was trying to hide his guilt. Yet, despite that, Tom was in high spirits, humming a tune. To an outsider, it would look like he was preparing for a trip rather than a business trip. Tom left early in the morning. Moreover, he left saying I'm off, which he doesn't usually say. I heard the engine start from outside. He wouldn't need a car for a business trip. Something felt off, so I went outside and saw that our car was still parked in the garage. Back inside, I casually checked the shoe cabinet and noticed Tom's hiking shoes were missing. You wouldn't pair hiking shoes with a suit. When I checked the closet, Tom's outdoor jacket was also missing. What kind of business trip was this supposed to be? But the fact was Tom would be gone for a week. I was glad I wouldn't have to see his face for a while. By this time, I had no romantic feelings for Tom whatsoever. A few days later, after dropping Asher off at daycare, I was cleaning the house when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, so I answered warily. The call was from a hospital in the mountains near our home. Shocked by what they told me, I hurried to the hospital. I picked up Asher from preschool and rushed to my parents' house. In the car, I explained briefly to Asher. Tom had gotten lost during a camping trip and slipped, falling down into a ravine. He was alive, but he had sustained an open fracture in his leg and bruises all over his body. Luckily, he was rescued by the local volunteer firefighters. If it hadn't been for them, he would have been in real trouble. At first, Asher was joking around, saying things like "that's just like mom," but when I told him about the danger to his dad's life, he suddenly got serious and started to worry. I left Asher at my parents' house and headed to the hospital. Turns out Tom's business trip was a lie. I knew it, but I couldn't contain my anger. I couldn't help but think I was too kind for bringing Tom's change of clothes and other stuff. And there was one more thing, an important envelope that I also brought with me. When I arrived at the hospital and asked about Tom, they told me he was in the ICU undergoing treatment. While waiting in the waiting room, I heard cries of pain. It seemed to be Tom's voice. I was worried, of course, but part of me also thought it was divine retribution. After a while, a nurse took me to the ICU. In the ICU, Tom was crying out in pain and anxiety, his body racked with agony. His neck was immobilized and his body was wrapped in bandages. If Asher saw him, he'd probably make a fuss about him looking like a mummy. It was quite an embarrassing sight. As soon as Tom saw me, he begged me. "Please, take care of me." Why should I? The words just came out reflexively. I wondered who had the cheek to say that. When I had a broken bone and was hospitalized, who was it that said, "I don't want to"? Find someone else. Then the curtain of the bed next to me was pulled back. And I screamed. There was Mitzi, no hiding it. She'd gone camping with Tom, after all. Mitzi was hurt just like Tom was. Her arms and legs were bandaged, not to mention her face and head. The area around her eyes was severely bruised. She probably couldn't move as she wanted. Tom hadn't noticed the curtain opening. His face was fixed, and with the pain, he probably couldn't focus on anything else. Tom vented his pain and frustration at being immobilized on me. "Do you have any idea what my pain feels like? Don't just stand there, get to taking care of me." Tom had slid down more than 10 meters to the bottom of a valley. Of course, he was in pain. He should just be grateful he's alive. "I have no idea what your pain feels like." I snapped back at Tom. I had reached my limit. Tom lied about a business trip to go camping with Mitzi, got in an accident, caused a lot of trouble for everyone, and now he's making a fuss about being nursed. After everything, he still makes a fuss demanding to be nursed. It's your own doing. Just be thankful you were saved. That's it for me helping Tom. Our marriage, Tom's and mine, had already ended. I decided to end it all today, right here. Mitzi was here, too, it was perfect. I decided to settle things once and for all. I decided to steadily corner Tom. I didn't care about his pain from the injuries right now. Justice is on my side. Does your company call camping business trips? Or were all your important clients at the campground, maybe? I wasn't going to ease up. I kept pressing Tom. Is there really a need for an IT guy to go to some remote mountain where you can get lost? Tom glared at me with tearful eyes, enduring the pain. Shut up. It's none of your business. You went back to your folks' place too, didn't you? Don't you start criticizing me. What an outrageous thing to say. I was honest about going back to my family's home. But Tom lied. I didn't lie, did I? Did you have some reason you had to lie? Tom just glared at me and said nothing. Probably couldn't come up with a comeback. I turned my back on the silent Tom and looked down at Mitzi. Did you take a tumble following Tom's lead? Mitzi, her face contorted with pain, managed to speak. Yes, I was trying to help Tom and slipped down with him. What was supposed to be a fun camping trip turned into quite the disaster, huh? I snorted through my nose. It's not what you think, Susan. It's a misunderstanding. Mitzi retorted weakly through her pain. What misunderstanding? It's all true, isn't it? I'm the one who insisted Tom go camping. I know this area well and knew of a great spot off the beaten path. Mitzi was trying to cover for Tom. Maybe she fancies herself the tragic heroine? Please, if you're going to blame anyone, blame me. Tom did nothing wrong. Mitzi was sobbing. The more she spoke, the less believable she sounded, but she kept going. I never meant to hurt you, and I never thought it would come to this. I'm truly sorry. She seemed drunk on her own tears, her words so insincere. Her words ring hollow. I'm the one who feels like crying. Tom, noticing Mitzi's voice, interrupted our conversation. I was just going along with Mitzi's hobby. You can't just say no to an invitation from your best friend, can you? Tom seems determined not to admit to the affair. So, the business trip was indeed a lie. Tom began to get rattled. Mitzi, still playing the tragic heroine, kept egging Tom on. Both of you, just stop. If you continue this disgraceful affair, you'll get what's coming to you again. It seems like I'm about to deliver karma to Tom and Mitzi right here. I'm done playing along with this self-indulgent charade. I took out an envelope that I brought from home from my bag. I pulled out photographs and scattered them across Tom and Mitzi's beds. Tom and Mitzi were speechless, mouths half open. Both of them had their eyes wide open as if in complete shock. The photographs showed Tom and Mitzi arm in arm entering a hotel, and intertwining hands as they entered my home. I had hired a private investigator when Champ found Mitzi's scarf on the bed. Tom, who had secret meetings not just while Asher and I were visiting home, turned bright red and exploded in anger. How could you do such a thing? Keeping hidden photos is underhanded. I only went to dinner with her when you were hospitalized with a fracture. Tom's blatantly defensive reaction almost made me burst out laughing. Mitzi, on the other hand, was still a sobbing mess. Mitzi was crying with her face in her hands, but I could see her peeking through her fingers. Maybe Mitzi had the weaker position. Tom's tantrum continued. This is nonsense. You must have fabricated this. With a slight movement of his hand, Tom brushed off the photographs. So, you're not admitting it. I didn't want to do this, but... I sighed heavily and pulled out an IC recorder from my bag. I had placed it under the bed in our bedroom. I could hear Tom and Mitzi gulp. Sweat dripped down from under Tom's bandages. I took my time looking at them both before pressing the play button. Don't tease me. Stop making me wait. I hit the stop button and asked Mitzi. Can't you take it anymore? Hey, want to hear the rest? Mitzi shook her head in silence, lost for expression. It seemed she was no longer up for acting the part of the crying woman. There's plenty more. You had quite a bit to say about me, didn't you? Stop it! Please, just stop. I'm sorry. My husband murmured in a small voice. I asked Mitzi when their affair had started. I was jealous of you. I had failed in my marriage, yet there you were living in such a nice house, leading a luxurious life. And all you did was complain about Tom, so I thought I'd take him for myself. It all started with Mitzi's jealousy. I guess the grass always looks greener on the other side. If Tom became mine, I could have that kind of life too. What's so wrong with that? Mitzi defiantly said. She was unapologetic, playing the victim as if none of it was her fault. While listening to our exchange, Tom tried to snatch the IC recorder from my hand, lunging forward. Careful. Tom must have been struck by a sharp pain from moving too abruptly. He lost his balance and fell off the bed. Tom didn't make a sound. He seemed to have passed out. Mitzi looked on at Tom, shocked. I pressed the nurse call button to summon the nurse. They arrived quickly, and I was urged to leave the ICU. Once I stepped into the hallway, I realized my legs were shaking. I had spoken boldly, but I was actually very scared. I started divorce proceedings while Tom was still in the hospital. My lawyer said I had plenty of evidence of infidelity to proceed favorably with the divorce. I would demand alimony and child support from Tom. But that alone wasn't enough punishment for Tom. I made sure the division of marital assets was executed thoroughly. The house was sold, and the proceeds split, along with our savings accounts, and stocks and investment products were divided in half. Tom's parents came to me, sincerely apologizing. They promised to oversee the payment of the alimony and child support. Asher, who loves his grandparents, promised to visit them from time to time. I filed for settlement for emotional damage against Mitzi. She'll have to pay back every penny, even if it's little by little. The accident left me with a permanent limp in one leg. I can't get around without a cane. Tom's condition was much worse, nearly leading to an amputation. He's lost the use of both legs and will be in a wheelchair for life. A business trip that was actually a cover for an affair. He was severely reprimanded by his company for the accident. The company demoted him as a disciplinary action. It could have been a dismissal, but his past performance was taken into consideration. No one in the company sympathized with Tom. He faced cold stares and felt isolated. Having lost the house and with his savings depleted from paying alimony and child support, Tom is living in an old apartment. It's obviously not barrier-free, so he's struggling with daily life. Tom's father recently updated me on the situation. Tom and Mitzi have split up. For Mitzi, a wheelchair-bound Tom was not someone she wanted anymore. Neither Tom nor Mitzi expected their lives to turn out this way. They must be regretting that if only they had stopped themselves at that moment, if only they hadn't lied, but it's too late for regrets now. Asher and I decided to move back with my parents. With the support of my parents and Asher now in daycare, I found the time to take a job at a local real estate company. I'm studying hard to get several real estate certifications. Asher really loves the increased interaction with nature here. He's overjoyed with life in this place. Every morning, before the sun even rises, he goes out to the fields with Grandpa to take care of the crops. Asher loves watching Grandpa operate the tiller. He must think his grandpa is a hero. After helping in the fields, Asher heads off to daycare, where he plays to his heart's content before coming home. He's gotten a lot tanner compared to when we were in the city, and he seems much sturdier. Thinking about Asher, living surrounded by nature rather than in the city might have been the better choice. The grandparents are also enjoying every day, smiling all day long in the lively household. Champ, the unsung hero of this story, seems to be enjoying life here too. He used to be reluctant to go for walks, but now he's eager every morning. He also loves the fields and playing in the mud with Asher and my father. Recently, we had a family picnic by the river, and Asher suddenly stood up. "I want to be just like Grandpa when I grow up." My father beamed with joy, ruffling Asher's hair. My mother looked on at Asher with joy in her eyes too. "Welcome home, Linda. The room was a mess, so I cleaned it up for you." "What? Why did you?" When I got home, not a single item was left in my room. I stood there, stunned, when my son's wife entered the room, laughing. "There's no need to be so shocked. I did it for the good of the house." "What are you talking about?" Her laughter and actions, devoid of any remorse, were completely beyond my comprehension. "Where are my things?" "Over there." Looking in the direction she was pointing, I saw flames rising in the yard. Then it hit me. "No way!" I ran outside barefoot to find my clothes and personal belongings being burned. What shocked me more was what I saw amidst the flames. A painting given to me by my late husband. Now it's nice and clean. Looking at my daughter-in-law, her face was controlled by malice. She was forgetting something far more important. Who was the one supporting this house? "Do you know what you've done?" "Of course. No need to look so scared." "Don't joke with me." "Well, there's still something left to do, isn't there?" The smirk on her face made it clear. "Are you trying to drive me out?" No. I'm just exterminating a parasite. Even with her changed words, I understood she was referring to me. And that's when I made a decision. Then I'll leave. And so, I left the house. But I was not alone in this. Everything was now in place. I swore on my late husband's grave that I would never forgive her. My revenge against my eldest son's wife had begun. My name is Linda Adams, and I'm turning 60 this year. Ever since I lost my beloved husband to cancer 2 years ago, I've been living alone. After he passed away, I felt a great void, but I'm finally getting used to living by myself again. I'm sorry, but I'm counting on you to take care of things from now on. Sure, I know. There's one last thing from me to Linda, a gift. A gift? Yeah. It should be arriving at your house soon. Thanks for everything. Those were my husband's last words. I reminisce about the times I had with him. He was a hardworking businessman at a well-known company. Our meeting came about through a mutual acquaintance, but we quickly hit it off and smoothly progressed to marriage. Since then, it has been nothing but bliss. We've got our son now. I've got to work even harder. Yeah, but don't overdo it. I have a precious wife and son to look after. At 28, I gave birth to our son, John, and 4 years later, our daughter, Emily, was born. I believe I worked hard every day as a homemaker, which was also my husband's wish. He acknowledged my efforts, and as a result, he left us more than enough savings and assets. However, even in such a life, changes occur. I'll be coming back home soon. Isn't your work too hectic? No, it's settled down now, so it's fine. And I know it's short notice, but I'm thinking of coming back next Saturday. That's fine, I'll be home. I was looking forward to seeing John, it had been a while. But I had forgotten something important. Then, on Saturday, I'm home. Welcome back. You must be tired. Take it easy. Hello, Linda, it's been a while. I had completely forgotten, but I was not fond of John's wife, Julie. She had been looking down on me and making snide remarks even before they married. Welcome, Julie. I offered Julie a strained smile. She seemed to catch on and gave a smirk grin. We're planning to stay over tonight, so please take care of us. Stay over? I wasn't aware of that. That's strange. I thought you'd been informed. Julie began to make herself comfortable as if it were her own home. It almost seemed as if she was testing how comfortable our house was. In the end, they stayed for 2 days, and it was a continuous strain on my heart. I thought that would usher in the return of peaceful daily life, but that was quickly about to change. Mom? I need to talk to you about something. It was about a week later. I had a bad feeling. Actually, Julie has. Hold on a sec. I took a deep breath. Sorry, what about Julie? Oh, right. So, Julie wants to live with you. Live together? It was totally unexpected. I asked for the reason. I thought it was sudden too and wondered why, but it seems she's worried about you. Worried? I couldn't help but wonder if that were true, why she hadn't reached out herself. I told her you are fine, but she won't listen. I see. How are things between you and Julie then? I think we're okay, but... He said they were fine, but he sounded less than enthusiastic. I thought it was bad to burden my son like this and made a suggestion. Then I'll just tell Julie myself that she can't live with us. If I say it directly, she'll give up, right? After hanging up, I looked up at the ceiling. Living with my daughter-in-law was out of the question. Her snooping around my house before must have been her scoping it out for moving in. With that in mind, I just couldn't accept her proposal. Hello? Julie, about the living together thing. I contacted her the next day. I wanted to settle things quickly before they got more complicated. You heard from John, didn't you? Her voice was clearly excited. She must have thought living together was a possibility. I've heard the story. So, we can't live together. Then there was a moment of silence. She must have been shaken. Why not? As you get older. And wouldn't it be better for you to have someone around? Maybe so, but I'm fine on my own. Don't say that. I'm really worried about you. Your concern is appreciated, but... All right. If that's what you want. It seemed she had accepted it for now. I thought now I could return to my peaceful daily life. Indeed, things seemed calm as usual for the next couple of weeks. But Julie hadn't given up yet. Hello there. One afternoon, she came over. Julie. What are you doing here? I've come to talk about a proposal today. Can I come in for a sec? Before getting an answer, she walked right into the house. Taking a seat on the couch as if it were her own, she began to speak. How about we try living together for a bit? Excuse me? We live together on a trial basis, and then decide if we want to make it a permanent arrangement. If you don't like it, I'll move out. I racked my brain desperately. A wrong decision now could lead to irrevocable consequences. Does John know about this? Oh, don't worry about that. Then she began to call my son. I waited for the phone call to end, pondering what to do next. John says to talk to you. Here you go. Hello? John? Mom, I'm really sorry. I had no idea Julie would go to you. What are you gonna do? I'm okay with living together. But don't get me wrong, I'm not agreeing with Julie's idea. I just think it's a good way to get her to give up. There was a certain logic to his thoughts. As he said, we could live together for a while and find the right time to say no. All right, let's do that. Deep down, I feared Julie might disrupt our home, but if things went south, she could just leave. And so, our living together began. At first, everything was peaceful. Things changed when John started spending more time away from home due to work. Sorry, I'm too busy to help out around the house right now. Don't worry about it. Instead, I'll take care of the expenses. Don't fuss over it. Leave it to me. Soon after, he left for a long business trip. And as if she had been waiting for him to leave, her attitude changed dramatically. Are you not so good at cooking? It was during one of our meals together. What? Well, it just feels a bit dated and plain. Even dog food might be better. She laughed mockingly, revealing her true colors. From then on, all pretense was dropped. Another day, as I was sorting out the laundry in the living room, she exclaimed, "Hey! Did you mix our laundry together again?" It's not necessary to separate them. She sighed heavily. When you mix them, your old lady smell gets on my clothes. Please do mine separately next time. Oh, and rewash mine, will you? Hey, where do you think you're going? I've got plans with friends. She never lifted a finger to help, preferring to gallivant about instead. I couldn't stand it any longer. Your behavior lately has been too much. I'm gonna have to tell John about this. I thought this would definitely calm things down. But she was not a woman to fold so easily. Don't joke with me. I'm here out of the goodness of my heart. What on earth was she talking about? Even though the arrival of Julie had completely disrupted our daily life. If you go snitching, it won't end well for you. With that, she threw a picture frame that was nearby at me. And it was a picture of my husband and me, no less. At that moment, I felt everything I had been holding back just overflow. Such a thing. Okay, I'll be able to get back soon, Mom. We'll talk in detail then. All right, John. 3 months after we started living together, because of what had happened before, I talked to my son, including about ending the living arrangement. He didn't even seem surprised when I called and readily agreed. It was just 3 days before he was due to return. I'll be coming back soon, Mom. Emily, something happened? Well, our lives were about to change even further. My daughter, who had been married and living in another state, came back home. Sorry for the suddenness. It's fine. But what happened? As I listened to her, she revealed that her husband's infidelity had led to her divorce. You can stay here for a while. You've been through a lot, after all. But there's a problem. I explained the current situation to her. So Julie is living with you. Right. John is going to be back from his business trip soon, so we will talk things over then. I see. I'm the newbie here, but I'll help out as much as I can. Thank you. It's reassuring to have you, Emily. That night, when Julie arrived at home, she asked, Hey, Emily? Why are you here? Well, a lot's happened. I'll be staying here for a while. Okay. Julie and Emily hadn't met that often, but for some reason, Julie seemed to have taken a liking to my daughter. Perhaps because Emily is older, Julie thinks of her like a real sister. Maybe because of that, Julie seemed unusually well behaved when my daughter was around. Seems like Julie is taken to you, so we might use that to our advantage. Indeed. We must be careful not to let on what we're planning. The next day, my son returned. I'm home. As I went to greet him at the door, his wife pushed past me. You're in the way. I stumbled from her shove. Hey, isn't that a bit dangerous? Just act your age, will you? I mean, you're an old lady. How many times have I seen her laughing while looking at me? At this point, I'm truly astounded by what she wants to do. What are you doing here, Mom? Just lost in thought, that's all. Emily came back, right? Haven't seen her since Dad's funeral. She'll probably be back soon. Then, about an hour later, we had dinner with my daughter who had just come home. When it's just the two of us, my daughter complains, but even she can't in this situation. It's been a really long time since we had such a peaceful family meal. My son's wife seemed to be in a better mood and started drinking. Julie, don't you think you're drinking too much? I'm fine. This is nothing. Is she not so good with alcohol? I don't think that's the case. But my son's wife continued to pick on me, emboldened by the alcohol. Why don't you have a drink with us? I'm not good with alcohol. What? What are you talking about? You can't take my request? I couldn't help but sigh. That's enough, right? You're clearly drunk. I'm still okay. I'm worried too. If Emily says so. In the end, Julie was taken to her room by my daughter. Looks like Julie's gone to sleep. If she's drunk and asleep, she won't be up for a while, so it should be fine. Then, it's time for the main event. And so the three of us talked about Julie. We intended to tell her that we were going to dissolve the living arrangement anyway. Are you okay with that, John? She is your wife, after all. I have my share of the blame for letting things get out of hand. But what's the right thing to do? We were at our wits' end. No good ideas came to mind, and time just passed. Then, my daughter asked a question. First off, why did Julie want to live with us in the first place? Hearing that, I indeed wondered. I realized I had never asked her or my son for a clear reason. John, don't you know anything? Last time I asked, she said she was worried about Mom, but that's probably a lie. Like, what if it's this house he's after? It's pretty big after all. That could be possible. Even before and after moving in together, I felt like Julie was always sizing up everything in the house. So, how about this idea? Emily came to us with a suggestion. It was a proposal we hadn't even considered, and John and I looked at each other. But it might be a burden on Mom. After a bit of thought, I realized it might be a good way to break the current stalemate. Yeah. Since it's Emily's idea, why not go for it? What do you think, John? I'm okay with it too. And so, we each started to make our moves. Of course, this was a secret from John's wife. A week later, everything was ready. However, since there was a chance of being turned down for any number of reasons if I talked about it alone, we decided to bring up the living arrangement issue again, all three of us together. and we decided to execute our plan in 2 days. The day before.
Julie, I'm sorry, but I'm going to head out for a bit.
When will you be back?
Well, I should be back by the evening.
Got it. She seemed unusually happy, but I didn't think much of it. Because by tomorrow, I'd be saying goodbye to this life. The only worry was leaving John's wife at home alone. But I was looking forward to catching up with a friend for the first time in a while and had completely forgotten about that.
I'm home.
I returned around 4 p.m., but I couldn't find John's wife. Then, unexpectedly, she came out of my room.
Welcome back, Linda.
It was dirty, so I cleaned it up for you.
Why are you coming out of my room?
You'll see if you look.
What? Why is this happening?
Nothing was left in my room. As I stood there in shock, John's wife entered the room, laughing.
You don't need to be so surprised. I did it for the good of the house.
What are you talking about? Her behavior and laughter, without a hint of remorse, were completely baffling.
Where are my things?
Over there. I followed where she pointed and saw flames in the yard. That's when it hit me.
No way!
I ran outside barefoot, and my clothes and belongings were being burned. Then, I saw something that truly shocked me. Among the flames was a painting, a gift from my late husband.
This cleans everything up nicely.
Looking at John's wife's face, I could see it was filled with hatred. She had forgotten something important. Who really supports this house?
Do you know what you've done?
Of course.
Don't look at me like that, you're scaring me.
Stop joking around.
Well, there are still things we gotta do, right?
My son's wife grinned at me.
Are you trying to kick me out?
No.
I'm just dealing with a parasite.
Despite the sugarcoating, I knew she was talking about me. And so I made a decision.
Then I'll leave.
I left the house. But it wasn't just me. Swearing on my late husband, I vowed revenge on my son's wife.
Are you really okay with this?
Julie had asked me that just before I left, but I didn't look at her. I could easily imagine the expression on her face. I called my son and daughter as I headed to my new place.
I'm moving to the new house today, a bit ahead of schedule.
Got it, I'll tell Emily.
Then I'll see you there.
When I arrived at the new house, I sat on the sofa. I felt a bit excited about starting a new life. About an hour later, John and Emily arrived.
I didn't expect such an amazing house. How did you manage to get a place like this? I asked a friend of your father's, and he said this house was vacant. It kind of resembles our old place too, so I made a quick decision.
We had a pleasant time, but soon, we all wore serious expressions.
For now, let's just give Julie the address. Given her nature, she'll definitely come by.
Then I'll take care of that.
Thanks.
After a while, I had dozens of messages and missed calls.
We're ignoring these, right?
Yes. We then waited for my eldest son's wife to grow impatient and visit. After spending a few days relaxing in the new place, someone visited us. Looking at the outside through the window, there Julie stood, looking exhausted.
She's here.
Time to greet her.
I'm kinda nervous. Don't worry, there are 3 of us.
I knew this was the moment of truth.
You came, Julie.
What's this all about, Linda?
What do you mean?
Why are you living in such an amazing place?
Well, you're asking me why. Let's just go to the living room for now.
So all the players were present. We faced each other in the living room.
I didn't know you had so much money, Linda. Well, of course you didn't. I didn't tell you. From now on, we plan to live here together. Sorry for keeping it a secret.
Suddenly, my son's wife's demeanor completely changed to a smile. Perhaps she thought she would be able to live in this house too.
Well, you could have said something sooner. Why were you keeping Mom, John? Mom told me not to say anything about it.
Like a surprise? Trying not to laugh was a struggle as I watched my son's wife, who had gotten the wrong end of the stick and was getting all excited. The first to break the news was Emily. Julie, I'm sorry, but it's just going to be us living here.
What?
Her eyes went wide as saucers.
Emily's right. There's no place for you in this house. Why not? You destroyed my most cherished memory. That was because you were the one who suggested living together, but I bet you really wanted to drive me out. What were you after, my house or money?
My son's wife looked down in silence. She must have hit the nail on the head.
But why such a mansion? Did you ask John for this?
This time, my son interjected.
You seem to be under some misconception, but since we've been living together, I haven't paid a cent for living expenses. What? Mom's been covering it all for us.
And yet you. My son's wife stood there as if frozen in disbelief.
That's a lie. It's not a lie. I didn't want to burden John, so I paid for everything. You wouldn't know that.
Then she started to smile at me ingratiatingly.
We got our wires crossed a bit, but there's still time to make it right.
Let's start over. She went on and on about how much better it would be for her to live with us. I, finding the situation absurdly funny, took her hand and smiled sweetly.
You're the parasite. Why don't you take a good look at yourself in the mirror? John, say something. You're on my side, right? I thought I was, but there's no excuse for this level of awfulness. Don't be ridiculous. Why am I the one?
Just give it up.
No matter how much you beg, this fact won't change. But I will never forgive you for what you did to me.
No one in the room was on my son's wife's side. Not even her husband. As I watched her face contort with despair, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders.
That's the deal, so you need to leave this house and that house too. That house too? Well, that house is in my name, and I can't let a stranger live there. A stranger, you mean?
Sadly, that's the situation. At that, my son's wife began to scream, throwing and smashing things around her.
Call the cops!
John, stop her.
Okay, I got it.
My daughter quickly phoned the police.
Stop this rampage now. Hey, back off!
The situation was finally brought under control when my son tackled and restrained the one causing chaos. In the end, my son's wife, Julie, was escorted away by the police, sandwiched between officers. She glared at us as she got into the squad car, but at this point, there was nothing we could do. I felt no sympathy, just a sense of serves you right. Above all, she was getting her just desserts for ruthlessly destroying the memories of my husband.
Were you shocked? But this is for the best, right? Yeah. Now we'll finally have peace. The rest is up to John. I've got it covered. After everything that's happened, I can't live with her anymore.
I have faith that he will handle things well.
Emily and I are here too. I'm counting on you.
Afterward, John and Julie got divorced. Of course, it wasn't an easy process. She cried and screamed during the discussions with the lawyers, trying to garner sympathy. Her demeanor was fierce, but my son dismissed it outright. I was present as well, and I was just astonished by her pitiful display.
Cut it out, already. Please, keep out of this. It's your fault this is happening. Stop blaming others. You brought this upon yourself. That's right. Just stop it. No matter how much you beg, I'm not changing my mind. That's the way it is.
I smiled, including all the times she had smiled in the past, to show I meant it. There's no need to hold back anymore. I really felt like applauding my son for choosing to divorce.
Complain all you want, but don't bother us. I wouldn't want to have anything else burned.
Since that day, Julie stopped complaining, and we finally had peace. I felt a slight easing of the guilt I had towards my husband. Turns out, Julie, now evicted and jobless, was hopping from one friend's house to another. Having become a housewife upon marrying my son, she had no employment. I'm curious to see what life has in store for her.
Is it okay for us to live here now? Indeed. I've said plenty to Julie, but Don't worry about it. You're welcome to stay as long as you like.
The ashes may remain, but not all memories of my husband have disappeared. From now on, the three of us will walk towards a bright future together. My name is Amelia. I wasn't raised in a wealthy household, but I somehow managed to land a job and even get married. My husband's name is Edward, and he works at a luxury hotel. I really thought I was going to have a happily ever after. But I never imagined it would end up like this. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that my childhood home was below average in terms of wealth. I was brought up in such a home, but I don't hold even a speck of resentment towards my parents. They gave up all their luxuries for me, took me places to play, and taught me about the different cultures of those places. I wonder if they loved geography, but as a child, I often thought they were trying too hard for my sake. I didn't want to make my parents go through any more trouble for me. So, I decided that I would work as soon as I graduated from middle school. My mother would say to me, "You really should at least finish high school. It might be tough to find a job in the future," and my father would add, "That's right. We have enough saved to send you to high school." I was really happy about their feelings, but even more than that, I had a strong desire to make life easier for my parents as soon as possible. It's all right. The sooner I start working, the sooner I'll start earning more, I said, with little certainty. But just like my parents said, there was no guarantee that I would be able to find a job anywhere. At that time, I had a friend who was a foreign girl who had immigrated when we started middle school. Her name was Jessica, and like me, her family wasn't rich. Maybe that's why we got along so well and always played together. Since Jessica could speak some English, we managed to have conversations. Without realizing it, I was learning Spanish while talking with her. By the time I was in the 9th grade, I could hold conversations in Spanish pretty well. Perhaps it was my Spanish skills that did it, because, lo and behold, a certain travel agency decided to hire me. They saw value in my ability to speak Spanish. Jessica and I, having both left school after junior high, began working and gradually lost touch. But I was single-minded in my work, determined to earn money. As time flew by, I found myself at 26 years old. There was a lounge in a hotel that I frequently used for work. It was a high-end place, but cozy, and the snacks and coffee menu were reasonably priced. We would have our meetings there with the staff. At that time, the waiter working there was Edward. The hotel hosted many foreigners, so he seemed to speak Spanish as well. Sometimes I would be there with foreign guests too. Maybe it was because we both spoke Spanish, but something just clicked between us. Edward struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were in a whirlwind romance that led to marriage. For a girl from a poor family to get married, it's quite the deep feeling when you think about it. Regardless, I was expecting to start a new and exciting life. However, the reality turned out to be the exact opposite. When we were getting married, Edward had a request. "If it's okay with you, Amelia, I'd like to live within my family home." The reason was that Edward had lost his father a few years back, and he was worried about his mother living alone. His mother's energy levels were dipping, and it seemed like a good idea to have someone watch over her soon. Plus, at the time, I was a remote worker who could do my job from home. I guess that's why Edward thought it'd be convenient, since I was always home to keep an eye on his mother and manage the household chores. On the flip side, Edward often had long hours at work and wasn't home much. With his scarce days off, having me, a home-based worker, around must have seemed like a good arrangement to him. But I couldn't immediately agree to it. That's because, when I first went to Edward's family home to introduce myself before marrying Edward, his mother had gone silent after asking about my education. "Amelia, which university did you graduate from?" When I honestly replied, "Well, I didn't go to college. I only finished middle school." My mother-in-law just looked at me in silence for a while. It was clear from her expression that she looked down on me. "Oh, only middle school? Well, she said, eyeing me with disdain. Given this history, I figured living with her wouldn't go very smoothly. So, I mentioned it to Edward casually. "Edward, don't you think your mom doesn't exactly see me in the best light?" When I asked, he chuckled a bit and said, "Nah, that's not true. Mom trusts me, and I'm sure she's got no bad feelings toward my wife either." Hearing that made me think maybe I was overthinking things. Edward also promised that if anything came up, he'd speak to his mother on my behalf. With that assurance, I agreed to move in with his family. But once I actually started living there, things were far from perfect. It was like a slap of reality. Whenever Edward and I visited his family's house, his mother would speak to him with such warmth. "Edward, thank you. I'm so grateful you're living with me." And Edward would respond, "Of course, I knew it would help you out." From my perspective, they seemed like such a close mother and son. But towards me, my mother-in-law's attitude was completely different, cold even.
"Well, Amelia, just make sure you don't hold Edward back," she'd say emotionlessly, as if she was instructing a servant.
It was clear she still looked down on me. I can't help but think that. But at that moment, Edward stood up for me. "Don't worry, Amelia is doing a great job working, too." But when I mentioned this, my mother-in-law momentarily turned stern, a detail I did not miss. I figured I should just speak to Edward if things ever got troublesome and decided to handle it my way. Thinking things would work out since we were living together. We were family, after all, and I didn't want any weird vibes between us. That's the spirit with which we started our cohabitation. But reality, as it often does, didn't quite bend in a favorable direction. Once, as I was working on my computer as usual, my mother-in-law barged into my room and said rather angrily, "Hey Amelia, when are you gonna clean my room? It needs to be done by 10 a.m. every day." I was taken aback since I had never heard of such a rule. Sure, I agreed to do household chores, but we never discussed to what extent. If she had just kindly told me from the beginning, that would have been fine. After all, I have my own job and can't be available all the time. However, arguing wouldn't be mature, so I quickly wrapped up my work, apologized, and started cleaning her room. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was just lounging in the living room, watching TV, and munching on snacks. Edward had expressed concerns about her mother's health, but she seemed well enough to clean her own room. I had imagined she might struggle with walking, but she was more sprightly than I thought. And once the cleaning was done, she was already commanding, "Now, get started on dinner, and I like it bland. I won't stand for anything too strong." She even told me to go shopping for ingredients right away. I thought it was too early to start prepping, but then figured I'd get it done and go back to my work. But when I returned from shopping, my mother-in-law was, unsurprisingly, still slacking off. It's hard not to get annoyed, but I chose to hold back and just get things done. Probably being tested by her. I believed she'd understand in time. But that hope lingered for months on end. There were days when the complaint was that I was 5 minutes late in getting the laundry in, or that the bathtub wasn't cleaned properly, nitpicking to an almost obsessive degree. Before I knew it, I ended up doing all the chores around the house. And yet, my mother-in-law just lazed around at her leisure. Honestly, if she has the energy to nitpick, she could very well do some chores herself. I started to worry that if this kept up, it'd start affecting my job, too. That was the last thing I needed, so I decided to wait until the evening to talk to Edward about it. Once my mother-in-law had gone to bed, I told him everything. "Hey, I think your mom just doesn't like me. I'm getting so tired of being constantly criticized." But Edward just chuckled and said, "Come on, that can't be true. Mom's a kind person. There won't be any issues as long as Amelia doesn't do anything strange. Please, try to get along with her." He just wouldn't believe me. Maybe it's because she's always doting on him and never complains to me. In fact, when Edward's around, my mother-in-law'd say, "Amelia, why don't you take a break and have some tea?" But even knowing that, there's a limit to my patience with this kind of life. I'm chased by household chores all day and end up having to work on my job at night. To be honest, my trust in Edward is starting to fade. If nothing changes, I might just collapse from all this stress. And then, in the midst of all this, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. Amelia, I'll be away for about a week, in about 3 months from now, so make sure you keep the house in order, okay? She sprang this on me out of nowhere, and when I asked, what's going on, she said, Edward suggested we go on an overseas vacation. That's my boy, always knowing how much I love traveling abroad. I'm looking forward to it. I was stunned. Because Edward hadn't mentioned a word of this to me. And to top it off, it sounded like I was being left out, expected to stay behind and house sit. I needed to talk to Edward about this right away, so I brought it up that night. But his response was, "Oh, Mom already told you? But you're coming too, right?" It turned out we had our wires crossed. It seems my mother-in-law had lied to me. Even if Edward wants me to go, there's no way I can enjoy a trip with her. In frustration, I told him, "I don't want to go. I can't possibly have a good time with your mother." And then Edward completely lost it and lashed out, "Amelia, what the heck are you saying? How long are you gonna keep up this childish nonsense? I won't allow you to speak ill of Mom like that. You better reflect on this. It's a vacation abroad for crying out loud, and I want to enjoy it too," he retorted. I was just shocked. I can't believe he won't trust me this far. With things like this, staying in this house has become nothing but agony for me. So, to prove to Edward that what I'm saying is true, I decided to take action the next day. Edward was off work, so the three of us were having breakfast together. That's when I challenged my mother-in-law. "You're trying to exclude me from the trip abroad, aren't you?" My mother-in-law replied with a defiant tone, "Oh, did I say that? Amelia, if you want to come, you should just come along, right?" But Edward interjected. "Hey, Amelia! Don't you get it yet? Apologize to Mom. Why are you being so defiant? You're not a child anymore." Even so, what I said was the truth. I have a stronger desire to clear everything up. I really want Edward to understand. But before I could argue back, my mother-in-law gave me the worst insult. "Well, maybe Amelia should just stay home, right? It's too early for someone like you to travel abroad. You won't appreciate the experience with your lack of education. And besides, lazing around at home every day without working. Do you even deserve to go abroad? You know it, don't you?" I was floored. To think she still believed I was unemployed. I had explained about my job even during our greetings. "I've told you what my job is, haven't I?" When I confronted her, she looked down on me. "What job? Remote work? Don't joke with me. You're just playing on the computer at home. It's been getting on my nerves every day. There's no way you're making money with that. You're just stealing Edward's earnings." She blurted that out. That really made me mad. But before I could retort, she went even further. "I have Edward, and that's enough for me. Edward can speak Spanish and works at a renowned hotel. There's no need to waste his earnings on a woman like you. Uneducated and unemployed. A bottom feeder like you should just leave as soon as possible." She just went on and on. After all her tirades, Edward must have understood what I was saying. As I looked at Edward, he made an unexpected remark. "Well, I can understand how Mom feels. Maybe Amelia needs to cool off a bit," he said nonchalantly as if he was fed up with me. At that moment, I made up my mind. I can't follow this parent and child anymore. My mother-in-law told me to get out, but I still wanted to confirm. "Am I really supposed to leave?" Laughing, she said, "Of course. Leave as soon as you can. We don't need bottom feeders like you around." So I said, "Understood," and started preparing to move out. I just nodded to the two of them and left the house. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law called after me with a sneer, "Enjoy your poor life as it suits a bottom feeder like you. But they don't realize that retribution will come upon them." About 3 months after I left the house, around the time when they were scheduled to go on their trip abroad, My mother-in-law called me. Amelia, I finally got through to you. What in the world is going on? She sounded quite frantic. But first, I said, I'm surprised you managed to call this number. She replied, of course, I tried several times and couldn't get through. I even called your parents' house to get your new number. I did tell my parents that either Edward or my mother-in-law might call. If they do, they should call back at this number. What's wrong? I asked her. In a panicked tone, she said, what's wrong? We're getting all sorts of collection letters. Help me out, I didn't know about any of this. Well, that's expected. You haven't been paying the utilities, have you? I simply answered what was expected, but my mother-in-law seemed to be in a world of her own.
I had absolutely thought Edward was covering our living expenses, to find out you were paying for everything. Why didn't you tell me? I had no idea you were making that much money.
It's kind of too late to be bringing this up now, but maybe Edward finally told her the truth. That's right. I had already started my own business, using the expertise I gained from the travel agency I used to work for. And now, it had grown to the point of earning $20 million, being widely accepted around the world. What shocked my mother-in-law even more was probably Edward's income. Just because he worked in a lounge at a well-known hotel doesn't mean he was raking in the cash. If anything, Edward was just an average Joe on the payroll, on the lower end, I'd say. And Spanish? That hotel is crawling with Spanish speakers. Even if he could speak it, it wasn't anything to write home about. There's no way his income could cover the living expenses for 3 people. In reality, just making ends meet for himself was all he could manage. So it's ridiculous that she hadn't realized until a collection notice came that I was the one paying all the living expenses for my husband's family. But the more I listened to my mother-in-law, the more appalling facts came to light. The reason why she insisted on me living with them wasn't to keep an eye on her. It was because she had been living off my father-in-law's wealth. But, blinded by a temporary influx of cash, she had spent lavishly until there was nothing left. That's when she turned to Edward, who she presumed was earning well. But Edward knew his income was low. And he was somewhat aware of my earnings, which is why he turned to me for help. Hearing this just reconfirmed what a hopeless pair they were. But their irresponsibility doesn't end there. By the way, are you managing to make the card payments? I asked that. Suddenly raising her voice, my mother-in-law exclaimed, exactly. Both Edward and I have bills piling up. Since I moved in with them, I've started to receive more and more credit card statements addressed to both of them. The amounts due each month kept climbing, and before I knew it, they amounted to quite a sum. The level of their luxury spending was beyond me. I have no idea what they were doing without paying the living expenses, but for sure, Edward's bills had surpassed his salary. And my mother-in-law hadn't kicked her old habits of lavish spending. It seemed they both had gotten themselves into debt, now totaling over $40,000. And what's more shocking is they thought Edward would somehow manage it, if it was just a bit of debt, as my mother-in-law put it, and Edward thought Amelia would take care of it if things got tough. The level of dependency in grown adults was appalling. Beyond exasperation, I was starting to feel the danger. So, when my mother-in-law brazenly said, "So, Amelia, you can sort this out for us, right?" I was astonished she could be so audacious. I made it clear to her.
After all that's been said and done, you're asking for help now? There's no way I'm helping.
That's when Edward suddenly took the phone. Hey Amelia. You're my wife, you have a duty to help us out. Do something, we can't pay this off. I couldn't fathom their nerve. But I did offer him a glimmer of mercy. So, you want to come over? I might consider it if you do. He was immediately enthusiastic.
Oh yeah? You'll let us stay, and you'll sort out the money? Then let's do that.
Where's your place? I'll head there right now. He was so eager, I had to be honest. Well, if you can make it. I'm in Hawaii right now. I have a vacation home here, I said. Both Edward and my mother-in-law couldn't hide their shock. What do you mean, Hawaii? We can't afford to go there right now. Edward panicked. I calmly replied, huh? Weren't you gonna travel abroad? Just swing by Hawaii. Your mother would love it. And you did ask my family for my phone number, right? Didn't you realize it was an international number? I added, oh, and don't forget the cost of this call. It adds up if you're on for a long time. And to drive the point home, I said, if we get divorced, I might think about helping with the money. To that, Edward was quick to reply, all right. I got it. Let's just get divorced first then. Seems he had realized his debts were not something he could exchange for anything. So, I told him I'd deliver the divorce papers once I got back to California and ended the call. Was it about a week later? I had returned to California, made sure to have the divorce papers properly written up, and the divorce went through without a hitch. Edward looked quite gaunt, so I guess he's been living pretty lean these last few days. But he mentioned something at that time. Turns out, he had been counting on my money for the overseas trip as well. Hearing that didn't even surprise me anymore. They probably thought I would pay off their debts. But of course, I had no intention whatsoever of doing that. What I proposed was, first of all, for both of them to stop living so lavishly. And then, for Edward and my mother-in-law to work their tails off. I told them if they did, they could eventually pay off the debt and at least manage the bare necessities. When Edward heard this, he lashed out, hey, that's not what you promised. You were supposed to think about the debt. But I was like, that's why I did you a favor, by thinking of a way for you guys to handle your debt repayment. So, good luck. Once you can afford to travel abroad again, I'll invite you to my Hawaii villa, I said with a touch of sarcasm, and left their place. Afterward, they both seemed to be working themselves to the bone from dawn till dusk, barely scraping by. It's probably a good lesson for them, since they've had it easy until now. On a different note, I heard that Jessica also built a house in Hawaii, and I had a reunion with her after so long. She took up a job that took her around the world after graduating middle school and now seems to be a company president just like me. She had her parents come over to the house she bought and they are living it up together. So, I called my parents over from California and we started living here. Now, I sometimes visit Jessica's place. We both feel blessed to be able to give back to our parents, and we encourage each other as we work hard at our jobs. Isn't today the anniversary of you and Dad's marriage? I've got a present for you. As she said this, the daughter presented a document. It was a divorce paper, with the husband's section already filled out. Sarah really is such a considerate and kind child, right? To think she prepared such a wonderful gift for our anniversary. You could have made an effort to look more put together, even at your age. There are plenty of women in their 50s who look young and beautiful. I don't need an old lady like you anymore. Dad says so, and I've never once thought of you as my mother in my whole 25 years. If you don't want to get sued for verbal abuse, you better pack up and leave fast. Both wearing hideous grins, they hurled abuse at me. Are you really sure about this? Things could get pretty rough, you know. I said this with emphasis, looking them straight in the eye, silently conveying the gravity of their choice. I am Jennifer, 55 years old, working for a major brokerage firm. I lived in a single-family home in New York, with my husband, for years my junior, and our 25-year-old daughter. I met my husband, Mike, when I was 23. After graduating from high school, Mike, who was a part-timer, worked at a convenience store near where I worked. I shopped there every day, so we naturally became acquainted. One day, I made a mistake at work and felt terribly down. Holding back tears, I somehow managed to get through my tasks and was about to leave the company to head home when I bumped into Mike by chance. Seeing my face, he seemed surprised at first but quickly approached me with a friendly smile. Hey, are you heading home? I just got off my shift too. How about grabbing a bite to eat? I know someone who works at a diner nearby. Taken aback by his sudden invitation, I froze. Then Mike, looking somewhat lonely, said, Oh, did I bother you? I'm sorry. No, it's not that. I was just surprised, not bothered at all. Relieved by my response, Mike smiled and took my hand, leading me toward the diner. I went along with him for a meal, somewhat passively, but that day marked the beginning of a close relationship, and after several dates, he asked me out. When my parents passed away unexpectedly, Mike supported me devotedly. Our relationship continued smoothly, and at 25, I married Mike. He had mentioned being estranged from his parents, so we had a quiet wedding at a chapel abroad. Though he was non-regular staff, Mike worked diligently and took over the household chores to help me, who was busy with work. When I was 30, I got pregnant with our daughter, Sarah, and Mike became a full-time homemaker, which allowed me to return to work soon after giving birth. We supported and cooperated with each other, living happily. I never doubted that these peaceful days would continue forever. When Sarah started kindergarten, I decided to entrust Mike with some financial responsibilities, giving him a family credit card for necessary expenses. I kept a close eye on the card statements, and Mike never made frivolous purchases, managing our home life well. I fondly recall seeing entries for indoor play areas for kids and children's clothing brands when Sarah was a baby. However, as she began elementary school, the situation started to look ominous. Around that time, my workload increased, and I began neglecting to check the card statements. This turned out to be a mistake. One day, casually checking the bank account, I couldn't believe the amounts being withdrawn. The recorded figures were more than triple what I had anticipated, and looking back over 6 months, the expenses had gradually increased since Sarah's school entry. Luxury clothing and watches, star-rated restaurant lunches, and high-end hotel stays had all accumulated, resulting in a hefty sum. I believe being a full-time homemaker is a respectable job, and I understand that Mike might want to indulge occasionally. I hated the idea of arguing over money. Yet, when the amounts became this significant, I could no longer stay silent. That night, I brought up the topic of the household expenses with Mike. To my surprise, his calm demeanor instantly turned hostile, and he began to shout. So, a full-time homemaker like me isn't allowed a little luxury now and then? You can focus on your job because I take care of everything at home. I've always appreciated what you do, Mike. That's why I don't mind occasional treats. But there has to be a limit. Do you have any idea how much you spent last month? When I asked him, my husband raised his voice in a fit of anger. Cut it out. Always dumping the house chores on me, and then you have the nerve to nag about everything. This was the first time my husband had ever talked back to me like this. I got caught up in the heat of the moment and confronted him. Think about it. The amount of money spent doesn't make sense. There's no need to buy high-end clothes every month. And the cost for lunch is too much for one person. Who are you treating? I have my own social obligations, okay? Who I have lunch with and where is none of your business, right? You're one to talk, going out drinking under the pretense of socializing. The reason I come home late from drinking is because of work-related socializing. It's not something I do because I want to. If I could, I would rather come home early to spend time with my family. Hearing my husband speak like that deeply saddened me. Social drinking after work is stressful and exhausting. I'd rather spend time with my family and, if I'm going to drink, I'd prefer to do it with you, Mike. I conveyed my feelings, but my husband just glared at me with a sullen look. After that, I didn't want to argue with him anymore, so I stopped nagging him about money. Still, I made sure to check the credit card statements regularly. His spending was getting worse. Not just fancy restaurant lunches, but it looked like he was also buying expensive jewelry for someone. I wanted to confront him immediately, but recalling our last exchange, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Then one day when I got home, our third grader, Sarah, came running up to me. Mom, my indoor shoes are too small, I need new ones. I've been asking Dad since last month, but he says you won't let me. She held out her worn shoes to me, the heels crushed down. I had asked my husband to replace school supplies and outgrown clothes before. However, it seems he neglected to do so and blamed it on me. I asked him again to please take care of our daughter's needs. From that day on, I noticed a change in the way Sarah looked at me. Apparently, my husband had made it seem as though nothing could be bought without my permission, casting me in the light of a controlling wife. By the time I realized it, it was too late. As Sarah grew up, she began to crave designer wallets and the latest smartphones. She would beg her father, and when he hesitated, she would come to me. When I advised her to adopt a more reasonable attitude towards money, she called me a stingy old hag and began to show open hostility. My husband sided with Sarah, mocking me in their alliance. Whenever I spoke to him about the credit card bills, Sarah would come in and say, "Stop being mean to Dad. If you made more money, we wouldn't have this problem. Why did Dad ever marry a stingy old hag like you? You should be more grateful for what Dad does for us. Without him, you'd probably be alone, living a sad, lonely life." By the time Sarah reached high school, she had become as willful and reckless with money as her father. Feeling like I also had to do something, I kept earnestly talking to my daughter, but no matter how hard I tried, it was undone by my husband who, being a stay-at-home dad, spent more time with her than I did. Yet, we somehow managed to get by because he did his part with the household chores properly. However, once my daughter started working part-time after graduating high school, my husband blatantly began to slack off on the housework. He seemed to be out often, and the house was empty when I returned from work. No cleaning or laundry had been done, and there was no meal prepared. Confronting my husband would surely just lead to a fight. My daughter was on his side, and there was no longer a place for me in this house. Then, one day, something definitive happened. It was our 30th wedding anniversary. When I came home from work, there stood my husband and daughter, grinning at me in the entryway.
What's going on?
As I spoke up, Sarah looked at me with a spiteful smile and said, "Isn't it your wedding anniversary today? I have a present for you." While saying that, she handed me a document. It was a divorce paper with Mike's section already filled out. Sarah's such a considerate and kind girl. To prepare such a wonderful gift for our anniversary. If only you'd made an effort to dress up a bit, even at your age. There are plenty of women in their 50s who still look young and beautiful. "We don't need an old lady like you anymore," said Mike. "And since Dad says so, you know, I've never once thought of you as my mom in my 25 years. If you don't want to be sued for emotional abuse, you'd better get out fast," Sarah added. The two of them were throwing ugly sneers my way, spewing insults. "Are you really sure about this? You're gonna regret it," I said, staring them down. Still, they kept grinning at me condescendingly. With a sigh, I took the divorce papers and said, "All right. Let's get divorced." Mike's face relaxed with genuine happiness. "Well then, since you're the breadwinner, we'll be taking the house. Sarah wants to live here with me, right? That's fine, isn't it?" "Sure, I don't mind. Take the furniture and appliances too, do whatever you want with them," I replied calmly. Then Mike started talking about dividing assets. "And about the division of property, you should give me half of your savings too. After all, you were able to focus on your work because of me," he said with pride. I responded in a tone of disbelief. "Oh, you think I don't know anything? You've been smitten with another woman using my card. Let's see, about $200,000 over 15 years. I could sue for the misused funds and alimony, you know. If you don't want this to get messy, you'd better back off quietly." Mike had been having an affair with a woman he met through a dating app since Sarah was in elementary school. It seems Sarah knew and approved of it, as the documents from the detective agency included photos of Mike, his mistress, and Sarah all enjoying a vacation together. Seeing the color drain from Mike's face was something else. And Sarah's eyes were darting all over. They never dreamed I knew about the affair. "Sarah, I'm disowning you as my child. Since you don't need a miserly old lady like me, it's fine, right?" Ignoring their stunned faces, I packed my bags, took the divorce papers, and left the house. I spent the night at a hotel and submitted the divorce papers to the office the next day. Our divorce was finalized. Then, I rented a reasonably priced apartment near my work and began living alone. But a year later, Sarah started calling me non-stop. I had cut ties and was ignoring her, but eventually, exasperated by the persistent calls, I decided to answer. When I picked up the phone, Sarah was shrieking so loudly it was breaking up.
What's this about demanding alimony now? You've ruined my life.
When I divorced Mike, I deliberately didn't ask for alimony for a reason. Just before the divorce, I met with his mistress. When I told her I was Mike's wife, she turned pale and started apologizing. I'm sorry. I had no idea he was married. Lying won't help you now.
It seems you've been quite involved with my daughter as well.
As I casually pressed the play button on the tape recorder, a conversation of them cheerfully gossiping about me started to play. I'm so sorry. I truly am. No need for apologies. With all this evidence, I'll be demanding a suitable amount for damages. I spoke with firm resolve, and she hung her head, her face ashen. I knew she was struggling with money. And that she had been seeing Mike, who was generous with his spending, because of that. Then, to her, who looked utterly drained, I suggested in a kind tone. You truly loved my husband, didn't you? And yet, asking for a substantial amount in damages doesn't sit right with me. Her expression brightened up instantly. Yes, that's right. I really love Mike. That's what I thought. Then, in light of your feelings, I won't press for the damages. Please, take responsibility and care for my husband to the end. If you ever abandon him, I'll come after you for the damages, all right? I told her if she didn't want to pay a hefty sum, she'd have to stick with Mike till the end. At that moment, she probably didn't take it too seriously. But not long after, our divorce was finalized. For her, Mike was just a convenient source of luxury, courtesy of my money. When the divorce was settled, Mike joyfully told her. She panicked and pleaded for a reduction in the damages, but I refused. You said you truly loved him, didn't you? If that was a lie, you must face the consequences. I won't be satisfied otherwise. When I conveyed this, she had no choice but to marry Mike. Sarah welcomed her as well, and maybe things were fine at the start. But it seems she couldn't stand it for long. Mike's lavish lifestyle was possible because of my earnings. After I was gone, they couldn't reduce their standard of living, splurging money like it was water. She worked tirelessly day and night trying to support their lifestyle, but Sarah seemed to scorn her, comparing her to me and hurling awful insults. Moreover, that house still had about 5 years left on the mortgage. That payment weighed heavily on them, and eventually, she couldn't take it anymore and left a completed divorce form before disappearing. Learning she had run away, I sent a certified letter to my ex-husband. Burdened not only with everyday expenses and the mortgage, but also the damages, Mike was at his wits' end. Hearing Sarah lash out in semi-hysteria, I couldn't help but snicker.
It's because of what your dad did that we're in this situation with the damages. You're struggling now because you've lived beyond your means. If you're going to blame someone, don't blame me, blame your father for not teaching you how to manage money properly.
I told her calmly and then ignored the still ranting Sarah, hanging up the phone. And that very day, I went to the store and changed my smartphone along with the number. After that, I left everything to my lawyer, who successfully secured the damages for me. According to the lawyer, Mike was initially very resistant. She and I met after I divorced that woman. It's outrageous to call it an affair. Plus, I've been the victim of her emotional abuse for years. She's a horrible woman. He complained to the lawyer. But, I had been recording all the verbal abuse and had submitted evidence collected from the private detective, as well as the credit card statements, which made it clear who was at fault. When the lawyer informed them that we had ample evidence, they seemed to realize that dragging out the discussion would be disadvantageous and agreed to make payments, albeit reluctantly. Moreover, that house went into foreclosure because the mortgage payments couldn't be met. Sarah grew tired of her father and seems to have found a live-in job and moved out. After hearing my final words, perhaps she took a hard look at herself because she left a letter addressed to me with the lawyer. In it, she wrote that she was hired as a live-in maid at a certain inn and included words of apology to me. Even so, I haven't just let bygones be bygones, but in my heart, I sent my daughter some silent support. Mike ended up filing for bankruptcy. Abandoned by his family and with nowhere to live, for a while, he was seen wrapped in cardboard, sleeping in parks and on riverbanks. Even in such straits, it seems he couldn't correct his reckless spending habits. He apparently got involved with loan sharks and is now missing. It's no longer any of my business. On my end, I've been living a peaceful life while continuing with my job. Recently, I welcomed a new kitten into the family. It's a little charmer with folded ears. Always comes snuggling up to me with a sweet look on its face. Today, when I sat on the couch, it climbed onto my lap and purred away. It was so endearing that it brought a smile to my face. I think to myself that I have to stay healthy for at least another 30 years for this little one. That's how I spend my peaceful days. The land that was in my mother-in-law's name, I've gone ahead and changed it to my name. The eldest son's wife, who had unilaterally changed the deed of the land I inherited from my late husband into her name. It's true that we never got along, but I never expected her to go this far. When I looked to my eldest son for help, there he was, looking at me with a cold gaze. Always picking on my wife, you're the worst, Mom. If you have even a shred of remorse, just graciously hand over the land to my wife and show some sincerity by living out the rest of your life as a maid. My eldest son was taking his wife's side. Let me be clear, I never intended to pick on her. If anything, I was the one being bullied. But in this situation, I didn't think anything I said would get through. I became so fed up with trying to persuade them, I decided to leave, just as the eldest son's wife suggested. So I should be the one to leave, right? I asked to be sure, only to be mocked for not crying and for putting on a brave face. But I wonder who's really putting on a brave face. After I leave, what will become of these two? They probably haven't realized yet. My husband and I were both in our late 50s. We have 2 sons who are both married with their own families, living away from home. So now, it's just the 2 of us, a quiet couple's life. Where we live is the epitome of the countryside that anyone would imagine. Without a car, it's inconvenient to get to the nearest train station, and there's a bus, but it only runs about twice an hour during commute times and doesn't operate on Sundays or holidays. There's a liquor store that doubles as a convenience store, in name only, standing alone at the center of the village. My eldest son despised this rural lifestyle. He wanted to go to a more prosperous high school in the nearby area, but ended up reluctantly attending a local agricultural school because his grades weren't good enough. With that resentment, upon graduating high school, he left home as if fleeing. My eldest son married a woman he met while living in the city he always dreamed of, and he has continued to live there, rarely visiting his childhood home. The eldest son and his wife have returned home a few times for marriage greetings, but other than that, they don't come by at all, nor do they get in touch. Still, they are family, and sometimes there are urgent matters that can't be ignored. In our family, it has been the daughters-in-law who have traditionally handled matters concerning the house. Even without close friendships, it's been that way. So, when I've needed to see my eldest son's wife, I've been the one to make the trip. Because my daughter-in-law really dislikes the countryside. When I visit, she says I bring a country smell and sprays air freshener around me. At first, it bothered me, but now I've learned to let it slide as a trivial matter. Especially because our relationship is already distant, and I didn't want to make it more awkward. Meanwhile, my second son lives in a remote area due to his job. The town where the second son and his wife live isn't much different from the rural town where he grew up. The second son says driving isn't too much of a hassle for him, and he often comes home to check on us, his parents. His wife is a charming woman with a generous nature, and we share similar values, which is why our relationship with her is exceptionally good. Then, while still in my late 50s, my husband passed away unexpectedly. I was engulfed in sorrow. My husband often said that when he passed away first, his only wish was that I wouldn't struggle and would complete the rest of my life without hardship. He said that if the land and house that have been passed down through his ancestors became too much for me to handle or a hindrance in my life, I should prioritize my life over them. In other words, once I inherited them, I could do as I pleased. My husband did talk to our eldest son about inheriting the land and house, a family tradition. But my city-loving eldest son, and especially his wife, vehemently refused, saying, unless it's prime real estate in a major city like New York, inheriting worthless rural land is pointless. So, the eldest son followed her wish and desired something else. The second son also preferred something other than the land and house, so he inherited other assets. I learned later that the second son thought it best for me to inherit the place filled with our memories. The second son and his wife considered moving back and living with me, but they decided against it because it would be too much of a burden on his commute. Still, they've told me warmly not to overdo it on my own, and that if it ever became unavoidable, they would be open to living together at home. I have no intention of sacrificing my sons' lives to be tied down to the land and house. When the time comes, I'll make a clean decision. Thus, I took the land and house, and the sons split the remaining assets evenly. After a while, development began nearby, and the value of the land started to rise. I'm in my 60s now, but I still have plenty of energy and enthusiasm for country life. As the development proceeds, the opinions and feelings about it vary among the people. For me, if a supermarket is built close by, I won't need to drive, and it could help avoid family disputes over issues like giving up driving licenses in old age. Most importantly, if it reduces the worries of my caring second son and his wife, then the development isn't all bad. I'm honestly excited about possibly having a more convenient life. However, I never imagined that my peace would be disrupted by the unexpected actions of my eldest son's wife. As the development progressed and rumors spread about an increase in bus services to the nearest station and the construction of high-rise apartments nearby, my estranged eldest son reached out. He said something along the lines of, "My attempt to make it big in the city has failed, and I've ended up quitting my job. Trying to earn a living in the city was a fleeting dream." I urged him to get to the point. Then he expressed a desire to return and live at home. When I asked him, "So, you want to live together?" he seemed to affirm, but with hesitant phrasing. About a month ago, at my husband's third-year memorial, a family gathering took place. At that time, my eldest son still complained about the countryside odor, so what had changed his mind? In the middle of our conversation, his wife abruptly interjected. "You really live in a lovely place. If it's getting all modern with the land development, you should have said so. Some places have gotten a better view since the mountain trees were cut down. There have been rumors for quite a while that a large shopping mall might go in there." The eldest son's wife didn't care about the countryside property before, thinking it wasn't worth considering, but now that it's developing into a more livable area, she's singing a different tune. The land and house my husband left us are in a very good location. Besides the spot where our house stands, the mountain behind our home is also land I inherited from my husband. There's gonna be land purchases with the development, right? Are you gonna let go of the mountain behind the house? I see, the eldest son and his wife regret not caring for this countryside property before. They can't say they want to inherit the land now, so they're cozying up to me, probably wanting a cut of the money if I sell the mountain. Oh dear, how awful of me. The real issue isn't money, it's about my husband. I listened skeptically to the eldest son's wife's excuses, which seemed quite theatrical. It felt like I was being subjected to a poor speech. To put it simply, it seems true that the eldest son has lost his job and is now unemployed. Their savings are so low they're worried about next month's rent. When I asked about the inheritance split with the younger son, she'd rather not touch that if possible. It's only been since the 3rd anniversary of my husband's death, so she says she wants to be thoughtful about how to use the money he left, but if they're struggling that much, they should use it. I thought. I held back from saying that, as it would likely result in accusations of being cold-hearted. Struggling to pay for rent, gas, and electricity, the eldest son's wife makes a heartfelt appeal, her voice choked with tears. She's asking to move in with me. Live in the countryside? You, who hated the countryside and were adamant about living in the city. I suggested that the eldest son take over, asking if he's going to find a job in the countryside. Wouldn't you be better off re-employing in the city? I asked. It was hard to imagine the eldest son, who left for the city as if he was running away from home, accepting a rural life now. The eldest son says he's in a tight spot, soon even eating will become difficult, so he's asking for help. Until the very end, he doesn't clearly say whether he's looking to re-employ in the city or the countryside. So, I set conditions. Moving in is temporary, just until the eldest son finds a new job. I added that he needs to work, even if it's just part-time, while living with us. In this area, with the land development, there's an increase in short-term job postings. I figured he'd get hired if he wasn't too picky. I thought, if I take care of them for about 6 months, they'd save up a decent amount of money and be ready for a fresh start. Marriage is about helping each other out, after all. I assumed the eldest son's wife would also work outside, even if not every day, to help gather funds for their new start. But when we actually started living together, all my plans fell apart. The eldest son was indeed busy looking for work. He searched for jobs during the day and worked as a security guard at construction sites for a few hours in the evening. The eldest son's wife, who had been meek at first, changed her tune as soon as her husband started spending long hours away from home for job hunting and part-time work. Oh, this is such a drag. I can't stand it. Using a pickup for shopping is just too tacky for me. Shopping had become a once-a-week affair, and the convenience of a pickup truck was simply unmatched, unlike the fancy cars you'd see in the city. She was the one who had offered to do the shopping. But after going once, she complained that the pickup was too embarrassing and refused to go again. In front of her husband, she'd praise my cooking and express a desire to learn, but when he wasn't around, she'd do the exact opposite. She couldn't stand the country-style cooking, craving French cuisine instead. She'd complain about mom's home cooking being annoying and then skip her turn to cook. One day, my eldest son's wife said she was gonna cook dinner tonight, so trusting her word, I headed off to tend to the backwoods. Without regular checkups and asking folks to cut down trees, the woods can get wild in no time. It's especially important around the change of seasons and dealing with fallen leaves, and since my husband passed, I've been hiring some young folks from the community to help out. But I can't always leave it to others, so I sometimes go to check on things myself. After making my rounds in the mountains, I came home exhausted in the evening only to find no lights on in the house and the doors locked, leaving me unable to get in. I tried calling my eldest son's wife's cell, but couldn't get through, and was at my wit's end when my son came home. As I was explaining the situation, the eldest son's wife arrived, so I confronted her, asking where she'd been and why she'd locked up. "How could you?" she snapped. "I did just like you told me, went shopping, and you forget what you asked for." She went on to tell my son that I insisted on having some fancy dish for dinner and said if she couldn't serve that dish tonight, she should leave the house. I never said any such thing and didn't even know I'd been left alone. But my son just took his wife's side without question. "Just because we're living together reluctantly doesn't mean you should pick on my wife. She's not used to country living. You can't expect her to find ingredients for some fancy dishes out here in the boonies." He accused me of deliberately making her go out as a form of harassment, even though he knew better. My son and I have always had our differences and have had our fair share of arguments in the past, but this was the first time I was berated so unfairly and one-sidedly. I was looking at my son, and yet he felt like a stranger, which was heartbreaking. I don't demand he take my side. But in the world, husbands tend to have a happier marriage when they side with their wives, and my late husband always stood by me. However, he always made sure to listen to both sides, so we had a good relationship with his mother while she was alive. But my son just yells at me, taking his wife's word over mine. Suddenly he turned surly and said, "Well, that fancy dish you're so keen on? Go ahead and make it yourself and eat all you want. I'm taking my wife out to eat." He snatched the keys from his wife and threw them at me before heading back the way he came. When I entered the house, I saw that my son's wife hadn't done a stitch of housework. It was just as I left it in the morning. I was so upset, I couldn't stop crying. But there was so much to do, it almost seemed a waste to wipe away the tears, so I just got on with the chores while crying. Later, the owner of the only diner around here, where we used to go as a family when the kids were little, came by to see if I was all right. My husband and the diner owner were childhood friends. And I knew my son was aware of his dad's fondness for the place. It turns out my son and his wife had been bad-mouthing me there. The owner said my son's wife was the one filling his head with all this stuff about me. I didn't go into details, just thanked the owner for letting me know. He said to call if I ever needed anything and didn't pry further. Though he looked sad, saying, "Guess people change when they move to the city, huh?" After all this, I decided not to expect anything from my son's wife anymore. If my efforts to get along don't get through, then it's just a waste of time. Better to spend that time and energy getting the chores done myself. I'd be no different from my son's wife if I thought about getting back at her for what she did. As usual, no matter what my son's wife did, I prepared meals for 3 and did the laundry for 3. Whether she thought it was her due or was pleased to have manipulated things in her favor, she continued to act like a guest in the house. Then one day, she came out with something that floored me.
"This property and house that's in your name, I'm in the process of transferring it to my name."
She claimed that she already had all the paperwork ready, flashing the documents at me. But since she didn't show them clearly, it only increased my suspicion about her story. Given my familiarity with such papers from when my husband transferred the property to me, they looked like obvious fakes. When I asked her if they were real, she retorted, "Of course, they are.
From now on, I'm taking over as the head of this household. If you don't want to be kicked out, then show some remorse and apologize for the way you've treated your daughter-in-law as punishment. How about this? Continue to live here as my personal maid. If that doesn't suit you, you're welcome to leave."
Her bold attitude suggested she believed the documents she held were legitimate. I confronted my eldest son, demanding an explanation. "Shouldn't you be the one leaving if you can't keep your promise to live together?" I tried to argue with common sense, but my eldest son retorted that I was the one who broke our promise first.
"It's a shame to be raised by the worst kind of mother who bullies her daughter-in-law. If you feel bad about it, then as a mother, you should just retire and leave everything to your son. Just because we've clashed, doesn't mean you should take it out on my wife out of spite. That's the lowest thing a person can do. Aren't you ashamed, a grown woman acting like this?"
My daughter-in-law managed to convince my son that I was harsh on her because I hated him. Using what she had heard about our differences in values and our incompatible temperaments, my daughter-in-law took advantage of the situation. Given that my relationship with my eldest son was already strained, it was easy for her to make things worse. Realizing that nothing I said to my son now would be believed, I felt that trying to persuade him was a waste of energy. Suddenly, my husband's words crossed my mind. "Fine. I'll consider everything you've said. But I need a week's grace period because I have preparations of my own," I consented. My daughter-in-law was reluctant, but my eldest son agreed. It took exactly 1 week to sort out what belongings to take and to find a new place to move to, among other necessary arrangements. After the agreed week, I left the house. As I was leaving, my daughter-in-law taunted me with a triumphant look, telling me to get out. I didn't respond to her insults and left the house in silence, giving myself a mental fist pump. This was the beginning of my comeback. 1 month later, just as I expected, I received a frantic call from my daughter-in-law. She was in a frenzy because when she tried to cash in by selling the land immediately, she was told it was already in the process of being subdivided and couldn't be sold. "What have you done?" she screamed in a shrill voice that was unbearable, spewing insults like a machine gun. In the midst of local land development, there had been an offer to buy the forested hill behind our house along with the land as a package. The condition was that it had to be sold as a set. It was a welcome offer, as managing the hill on my own was challenging. Yet, I still had a desire to live in the house I had shared with my husband a bit longer, so I put the offer on hold. During this time, the issue of our home's deterioration came up. A relative in construction had mentioned concerns about our ancestral home's aging condition when they visited for my husband's memorial service. The house felt too large for just me alone, a sharp contrast to when it felt just right for 3 generations. I couldn't deny a sense of loneliness being left behind in it. Even if I rebuilt the house, my sons probably wouldn't live there anyway. I began to think it might be best to sell it after my husband's 7th death anniversary. The company interested in buying the forest and land told me such developments take years, so there was no rush. However, the start of cohabitation with my eldest son and his wife gradually shifted my plans. Determined not to wait until my husband's 7th memorial, I decided to let go of the house. The company even offered to cover the cost of demolishing the house and clearing the land, which was a relief to me. I couldn't bear the thought of my eldest son's wife, who believed she had a genuine contract, doing as she pleased with the land my husband had left. I refused to give in to her, nor to my eldest son, who followed his wife's words without any doubt. I informed my younger son of everything that had happened and shared my decision. He said he was sad to see the family home go, but reminded me that memories are held in the heart, not in things. Moreover, my younger son and his wife had offered me to live with them. I know there's some anxiety about leaving the familiar place, but this area is pretty rural, too, so I think they'll come to like it. I'm currently living with my 2nd son and his wife, and I'm really happy with their kindness. I just let the first son's wife screaming go in one ear and out the other, and end the call myself at just the right moment, switching to block the incoming calls. Later, my eldest son, having asked around the relatives about where I was, came to the 2nd son's house. He came crying to me for help. Thinking it was too late, I was about to send him back, but then he started telling me how it was all his wife's doing after she kicked me out. It all started when a friend of the first son's wife introduced her to a paralegal. She trusted her friend, so of course, she also believed the paralegal without doubt. She was told she could change the land and house from my name to hers by just giving a thank you fee. Moreover, she was told the fee could be less than half the market rate. Later, when a big sum of money would come in, she thought they could just cover any shortfall from my husband's estate. On the promised day, the friend and the paralegal prepared the transfer documents and handed them over to the first son's wife. She, without any suspicion, believed them to be genuine and handed over the thank you fee. Once the preparations were done, the first son's wife eagerly explained everything to the eldest son when he came back from his part-time job. Exhausted, the eldest son didn't think deeply and trusted his wife's words as the truth. If you think about it, it's a strange story that the wife becomes the homeowner while her husband is still alive, but she convinced him by saying, "It'll be more convenient for your mom if it's in my name." As a fellow housewife, we can have a heart-to-heart and work things out. He foolishly agreed after being told such a plausible story. While the eldest son was out looking for a job and doing part-time work, the first son's wife methodically planned to kick me out, and by brainwashing the eldest son behind my back, she successfully managed to get me out. However, when she triumphantly went to sell the house and land, she was told it was impossible because the land was still being divided and got desperate. She tried to contact the friend and the paralegal, but couldn't reach them. Eventually, their phone got disconnected, and when she contacted the friend's parents' house, she was told they had disowned the criminal and didn't know where she was. That's when she finally learned that her friend had been a repeat fraudster and was a convicted criminal. The first son's wife later found out that many of her former classmates had been victims of this friend. The friend had been introducing former classmates as fake lawyers, accountants, and paralegals, and swindling them out of their service fees. The first son's wife had mentioned the land to her friend, which led to the introduction of the so-called paralegal. Among the victims, some had filed police reports, while others had given up, considering it a costly lesson. Those people could say that because they still had a home, even though they lost money. The eldest son and his wife, having lost money, their home, and the inheritance, had to focus on sorting out the situation before even considering filing a complaint. When I suggested that they should be able to rent an apartment since most of the inheritance should still be there, the eldest son said that the ATM card for the account where the inheritance was deposited had been swapped out with a different card. By the time they realized, all the money had been withdrawn. He came begging, genuinely broke, pleading for help. He explained that the first son's wife had been told that additional charges had arisen because the document preparation had been quite a hassle, and she went to withdraw money with her friend. That's probably when the PIN was stolen. I've heard that if you hire a pro to swap cards, you won't even notice it. Driven by immediate greed and lacking attention, the first son's wife had become an easy target after blabbering about the inheritance to her friend. I heard that a little while back, warnings had been circulating from the alma mater of my eldest son's wife. They'd been alerting that a graduate had been repeatedly defrauding classmates and juniors, so be careful with contacts and offers from people you don't usually keep in touch with. But the first son's wife, thinking only idiots fall for scams, ignored the alerts. I turned away from my eldest son and his wife, believing they got what they deserved for being driven by greed. Though the inheritance was gone, I was sure the eldest had some money saved from his part-time job. But that measly part-time pay? Gone with the wind on drink tabs, for sure. Led astray by drinking buddies, his savings from part-time work dwindled to nothing. It's your own fault for not planning ahead. I rebuffed him once more. Just as I was getting troubled by his persistence, my daughter-in-law from my second son came home. Her return, GI slung over her shoulder, radiated such a force that my eldest felt a threat and skedaddled. The second son's wife had recently taken up self-defense as a hobby. When the homeward-bound daughter-in-law from martial arts classes ran into the lingering eldest, he got scared and beat it. Saved by the bell. I thanked my daughter-in-law from my second son for the timely rescue. The eldest son and his wife, having been living as live-in workers at a diner run by a childhood friend of my husband, got booted for continuously griping about the low pay compared to the big city. Do they even know what gratitude is? After that, no one would lend a hand to my eldest son and his wife. They somehow survived until one day, a new house was built on the land where we used to live. Seeing this, my eldest son's wife snapped and broke in. "This is my land and house. It was supposed to be mine." Spouting such nonsense and squatting there led to the police being called and her arrest on the spot. I was contacted by the police as a potential guarantor, but I refused. Then she started her silence, saying she wouldn't talk unless her mother came. The police asked me to help persuade her, but I refused as well. "Your son is asking for help," they relayed, but I felt no obligation to assist, suggesting they might as well lock him up. When the eldest son's wife was arrested, she claimed she had been tricked by a fraud. Apparently, there were a number of similar complaints filed, which made her story seem credible, but that doesn't mean her crimes were erased. She got squeezed for all she was worth, and I heard that the friend and the fake paralegal who committed the fraud are still at large. Even if they are caught, my son was told that the stolen money won't be returned. It seems that he has finally seen the light after the inheritance was not only used without permission but also stolen. The couple divorced, each starting a new path, but my eldest son seems to struggle finding stable work. His ex-wife, having had enough of the countryside, vanished one day after working at a seedy bar back in the city, leaving behind significant debts. I've officially moved in with my second son and his wife. The living arrangement started as a trial due to the ordeal with the eldest son's family. I didn't want to burden my daughter-in-law. But living together turned out great. We say what we want without tension and click well since she's not overbearing. Most importantly, we share the same taste and exchange recipes, making every day enjoyable. The considerate environment we've built doesn't strain us with needless courtesies. Neighbors even mistake my daughter-in-law and me for mother and daughter. That's how well we get along. As my husband would have wished, I'm savoring life with my second son and his family.
Looking forward to sharing these stories, I prayed at my husband's grave.